She was able to uh, save money and to keep her mind from, and then all day she had a little boy. So, and it was fun for us.
Do you remember being inconvenienced by rationing, that you couldn't go driving in the car, for instance?
Well, that's it. Unless you had a serviceman home on leave, you couldn't drive a car. You couldn't take a car and you couldn't get gas, number one. And you could get gas with ration stamps. It was pretty scarce. But you did have to have a serviceman in the car with you. Otherwise, you just couldn't, you just couldn't go driving around. Unless it was something essential.
Yeah.
Essential work or something.
How about the sugar rationing and the meat rationing?
That's right. Everything was, I thought something that was really interesting, and I've told the kids, to me it was interesting. My mother, being Irish, she did drink coffee, but she allowed us to have tea when we were kids, but you could never have coffee. You could never have coffee till you were at least 12. And then a long time, she didn't give it to me at 12. She wouldn't let me have coffee, or my sister. And then the war came along, and coffee was rationed, so we couldn't have it. So we didn't get coffee until we were older. We could go out and get it ourselves in the diner.
Yeah. I guess tea, there was no problem with tea.
No tea, there was no. Sugar there was. She used to make a cake that she called wartime frosting, where they frosted only the top. Nothing on the sides, The sugar was hard to get, and
meat was rationed.
Meat was rationed, and shoes, leather. Boy, it was something. If you get yourself a nice pair of leather loafers, which were very popular during the war for teenagers, and I remember very well getting them. They came from Maine when you could get them. They had shoes that were horrendous. The material, I don't know what the material was, but they were awful, and they were uncomfortable. Nothing breathes like leather. But you took care of stuff. You had to take care of it because you couldn't get it.
Because you didn't feel put upon because of the ration.
No, I tell you, you want me to tell you what I felt put upon? This is a typical teenage reaction, in a way. Not put upon, but what I felt very cheated about was, number one, we were going to graduate, and the war was on. We didn't graduate till 46. There was one thing I looked forward to, with all of us did, was the trip to Washington, D.C., and that was absolutely out. There was no way we were going to Washington. And also, there were no boys. As soon as they hit 18, and some of them at 17 joined up, so we never got to date a college boy, because there were no college boys. They were all in the service. It's kind of silly, isn't it? But that's
the way it was.
We were teenagers, and after all, the fact that we were interested in all our family and all our friends and did our effort, whatever we could do for the war effort, we still were teenagers, and we were still, well, that's not fair, we don't have any, who can go out with a college boy? There aren't any,
Yeah.
But we would have probably been asked, who knew? But we did have, we ate sparingly. I mean, we had a lot of pasta, I'd say pasta now, but, macaroni and cheese, fish. Fish there must have been an abundance of fish, because we had a lot of fish, I tell you. I don't believe that was ever rationed. I don't believe so either. Beef was hard to get. Occasionally, we'd have pork. That was an era when you could eat all this kind of stuff, right? We always had chicken. I think we got chickens. But bacon, oh my, I love bacon. Never could get bacon, very rarely. Because you'd give up so many of your ration stamps for bacon that my mother would say it isn't, it's not really worth it. Unless my brother-in-law came home on a leave or my brother came home, then she would splurge with the stamps.
Did you have a Victory Garden?
I had a Victory Garden, and you know where it was? Over on Farragut Avenue, across from where the service station is over there. There are about 5 or 6 little houses from the corner of Ravensdale on. That was all open land, and that's where I had a Victory Garden. Yep, all of us did. I think 4 or 5 of us.
Does that belong to the village?
I don't even know who it belonged to. Whoever owned the property let us have victory gardens there. Of course, Zinzer's always had gardens, but they were taken. They were all taken. Everybody grew vegetables up there, and of course, you know, a lot of my friends' parents had gardens up there and took care of them. But I had a victory garden up there, and next to mine was, well, what it was is four of us. They wouldn't give me one alone, and it was too large.
Yeah.
It would be, were three girls and myself from school had one, and next to us, I remember distinctly, was, I think he was Chief then, Murray.
Ed Murray?
Ed Murray, the father. And I remember Carol, she was a little tiny girl at the time, and she'd be there waiting to work with her father. Yeah, we grew carrots and beets and...
Tomatoes?
Tomatoes. I think tomatoes. Beans.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't big, but we did have one, and a lot of people, it was all used. All of that property was used, but for some reason or other we couldn't get one by ourselves. I wouldn't want one by myself, too much work. You know, for just one person to get up there and rake and seed and weed and all that kind of stuff.
Your father and mother didn't help?
My mother, she never bothered. She, you know, if we brought carrots and stuff, she would, but she didn't bother.
Where were you living at the time?
At the time, I lived on Lower Warburton, South Warburton, when the war broke out, in 1941. During that time, I don't know what year, I think it was 43, we moved to 619 Warburton, which is gone now, which is the corner of North and Warburton where Pagello and Sohegan's office is. There was a tenement, a big building. That's where I lived, which was overlooking Riley's garage, which is Bob's service station now.
Oh.
And that's where I lived, probably, yeah. I think it was 40, maybe it was 42. I lived there, yeah. So I was there most of the time.
That was quite a walk then, from there to your victory garden.
Well, it was, but then everybody walked.
Didn't you have bicycles?
We had bicycles.
That's how I got around during the war.
My brother actually did more riding on bicycles than I did. I think I rode, I guess, but we walked everywhere. We always walked. I don't remember ever. Well, there really were no cars that. I mean, there weren't.
Weren't there buses? Well, you wouldn't have.
Well, buses they had. Yeah, we take buses into Yonkers. Definitely buses. At that time, the square area of Yonkers was incredible. I mean, it had everything you could possibly want. Oh, my goodness. It had 3 or 4 or 5 and 10s. It had beautiful dress shops. It had shoe stores galore. It was wonderful. You get the bus, for instance, I could get the bus right on the corner by the service station there, right down to the city line, change to the trolley. And the trolleys were running when I had my first couple of kids, too. It isn't all that many years ago they took them away. And the trolley right into the square, and do all the shopping you want on Saturday. And we did it quite frequently. White Plains wasn't accessible. We never went there. Very rarely went to White Plains. And, of course, Central Avenue we never even knew about. So we had... it wasn't all... the food, as far as the rationing, yes, it did hit us, but it wasn't so big a hardship. You know what I'm saying, Mary? We didn't starve. And when you read about all the horrible things that were happening in Europe, why, you just felt blessed that you had food at all. That's how we felt.
Yeah.
And and as Marie mentioned on the tape with me, we exchanged, we had that exchange program with the kids in Hastings, England. And, you know, when we would think about it, gosh, they don't have toothbrushes, they don't have toothpaste, they don't have pencils.
Did you ever correspond with any of the Hastings kids?
I cannot recall who it was. Marie kept up with that girl a lot longer. She did many years after the war. I didn't. But I do remember the packages, and I do remember the drawstring bags, which we made. In sewing class. Were made in sewing class. Not all of us made them, but were made in sewing class.
And what did you send in the bags?
Well, we would send things such as scarce things that were harder, well, very hard for them to get. toothbrushes, toothpaste, pencils, little pads,
Chocolate bars?
chocolate bars, chewing gum, all kinds of things like that. You know, you could have put too much in there, but I guess they went in bulk. They sent them. I wanted to bring out this also about during the war, the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So many men went into the service. So many of our teachers that were there for quite a number of years, because, well, they still are, but at the time, Hastings high school teachers stayed there forever and ever and ever and ever. Your older sister could have a teacher, and 5 years later you would have the same teacher, and that kind of thing. So a lot of men went into the service. When you said a Ball, I thought you meant the teacher. Mrs. Ball became our physical education instructor.
Oh.
And I don't know if can't be the same person, but anyway, she only stayed during those years that of the war. Well, I got out in 46, and I'm sure she was gone before then. They filled in, and I just wondered if some of them were not retired, but would not have come here had it not been for the men leaving for the service.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, many of our teachers were, Mr. Ahrens was a captain in the Air Force. He taught art, and so many of them went into the service.
How about Mildred Davies?
Oh, she was there all during the war.
Yeah. Wasn't she involved in the exchange with Hastings, England?
Dynamite woman. Dynamite. Oh. Oh, yes. Yes, very much so. Very much so. Yeah. See, the war started for us. It was just about the time we were going into junior high, and that's right after Mrs. Jason's wonderful 6th grade class.
Oh, I thought she was 5th grade.
We had Mrs. Jason. Our class was the first class that Mrs. Jason had as a 6th grade class. She taught special education classes before that. And then she went on to others, but we were her first.
Oh.
I remember going back to her when I was in 7th grade to ask her help with things, because it was such a big change to go into the high school building.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, it was really something. And Marie mentioned the air raid drills. We had the air raid drills. Also in school. Also air raid drills at home, a lot of them in Hastings, I guess because of our proximity to the city and, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
how do you remember those?
Well, I remember that I was an air raid warden, a junior air raid warden, and the reason I remember that so well was because the only time I was allowed to go out at night. So I loved it. Isn't that terrible?
Yeah. Well, what were your duties?
Actually, well, we had to do pretty much what the senior air raid wardens did, and listen to them too. Double check to make sure that there was no light shining around windows, make sure everyone's blackout curtains were pulled, or shades, whatever they had. If there was even a chink of light, we were to report to the senior air raid warden. That's the kind of stuff. We were assigned, mostly...
Was that every night?
It was only when there was an air raid.
Oh, I see. What was there a siren or what?
Sorry, there was a siren, and I guess it would be up on the hill, the siren and the anaconda whistle would blow, and that would warn us. There probably was a signal. I mean, the 9 o'clock whistle, of course, was with us forever, but this was a different, I mean, it was more blast or something, and the siren up on Ballard Hill, which still goes off for fires, and then you knew there was an air raid warning. And then we had hats.
What time did they occur? Do you remember?
They always occur. Of course, it was dark. I don't remember. It was probably not too late in the cold weather. It was probably 7, 8 o'clock at night. You never knew. You never knew when they were going to pull an air raid drill. There were drills, of course, but you never knew if they were drills or not. How come it never occurred to us to be? Well, we were a little scared, but not scared to death or anything. We were a little frightened about an air raid drill. But again, I don't think the way it was with adults. It's not that. I don't get the impression that I was frivolous. Believe me, I wasn't. Not with the things that were happening all around us, with my brother-in-law being killed and other friends, brothers, and wounded, and my brother Steve being wounded in Italy, and being in a hospital there, and all kinds of stuff like that. I mean, that's very serious stuff. But somehow or other, the air raid drills, I think being allowed to go out was just something we look forward to.
What did what they do about the street lights? Did they turn those off?
Oh yeah, they went out. Well, they were the kind of street lights, you know, the kind that went out over the street. They were on like wrought iron type. They were nothing like we have now. Well, now what they did, what they were like, they were something like what we have now, because this is nostalgia. If they had left them alone, we wouldn't have had to go through all this nostalgia. We still have the same street lights. They would go up the same way, but instead of being up here, they went out over the sidewalk.
Oh.
With a shade kind of thing. They were black, and they went out.
Oh.
Oh, it was pitch black. We had little flashlights, and we wore helmets, and we had some kind of banners. I wish I had kept that stuff.
I was just going to ask you.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Oh, it'd be nice to have an exhibit.
It would be very nice. In fact, it would be nice if you could get a hold of the gear that the air raid wardens, the adults wore.
Mm-hmm.
I remember they used to be really hard on us. Oh, this is not, don't fool around. I don't want to hear any laughing, Well, sometimes you'd laugh because somebody would trip, which is funny, but this is serious stuff, I can't remember that captain's name, but they were very, very, very strict about it. They really were. They saw one tiny slit of light. They knock on doors, turn off that light. It's coming through the shade. Yeah.
Do you remember any of the troop ships going up the river or down the river?
See that, I remember when they had the two ships that visited Hastings and were docked at Anaconda Dock, and they at different times, two different ones. And I remember going on one and visiting, but I cannot recall the troop ships, which I think is sad that I can't recall it, because Marie recalls it very well.
What were the ships that were docked at Anaconda?
I think one was a destroyer. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about ships, but
they were Navy ships?
Navy. Oh yeah, Navy ships, all sailors. And interesting, very interesting. Again, that was exciting for us because we read about these things, we read about these ships, and we had relatives and friends, brothers and so forth that were on these, and to actually see one, it was just wonderful to be able to see one of these, see how they live and kind of thing. I tell you what was very popular with us was movies. Movies in Hastings.
Did you go down to Yonkers, or did they come here to the theater?
I never really and truly I don't remember going to Yonkers very often to movies, but we always went to Hastings movies. And we'd go probably every weekend.
Really?
That was a big source of entertainment. Old movies.
Old ones.
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is they would be, Mr. William movies and stuff like that. We had Sonia Henney movies. Of course, it was black and white. I guess Technicolor came in at one point. Another thing that was interesting, Mary, during the war was very, very popular. Radio was extremely popular. Well, of course, there was only radio. There was no TV.
Yeah.
And music.
I was just going to ask you about the big bands.
Oh, big bands, incredible. And of course, I got a lot of it from my sisters because they were older, and learned all the dances and so forth. And of course, we danced with girls in school. We danced with each other because there were no boys, or very few. And I recall distinctly that there was some kind of musician strike during the war. What is that, ASCAP or something?
Yes.
They were not allowed to write new music. So they would play, the big bands would play a lot of songs and their own renditions, and my mother would say, oh my goodness, I remember that, and I would say, how do you know that? She said, oh, that's from 1929 or something. Right. They also had a lot of war songs. A lot.
Yeah.
Since You Went Away, and I'll See You in My Dreams, all those things that were nostalgic now, but very touching then, too, because they were so true.
Yeah.
Saturday night is the loneliest night of the week, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a kind of bittersweet thing, the music, but very popular. There were school dances, a lot of school dances, and up until the senior dance, there were a lot of guys around to dance with, but not many after that.
Yeah. But you did have a senior prom, even if you didn't go to Washington.
Well, I did because I graduated in 1946.
Oh.
You see, and in 1946, when I graduated, that year of 45, 46, we had a lot of young men came back from the war and came back to school.
Oh, really?
Yes, they did. They came back, some of them who hadn't finished, some of them who, they didn't call it PG, postgraduate course. They just gave them some extra courses and stuff. And there were a lot of them in the hall. That was interesting.
Yeah.
That was interesting because we'd see faces that we hadn't seen, you know.
Did they have a hard time adjusting?
No, they had a great time.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they really did. I don't recall any of them having a hard time, but then I don't remember how many of them there were. I mean, there were... The boy that I went to the senior prom with had come back from the war, and he, from the service, and he was from Graham Home, I think. Did I go to the senior prom with him or another dance? Or he came to the senior dance. It wasn't the prom.
Oh.
The prom I went with someone else. But a senior dance was some boy who had come back from the war, and he lived at Graham. He had been living at Graham when he went in the service, and he was older than I. See, this was novel.
Yeah.
This was novel to be going to a dance with somebody who was 21 or 20.
Oh, yes, I can imagine.
They were old. Oh, my goodness. When I think about it, it's something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what else I can tell you. I've been rambling.
Well, I'm just... no, that's all good. I just wanted to look over these and see if I've left anything out. Did your family life change at all? Well, it did because your sister came back.
That changed in the fact that the whole family life changed because it wasn't together. You know?
Yeah.
The brother-in-laws were gone into the service, and my brother and cousins, you know, that kind of thing, because we used to have Sunday nights, was always a tradition. We had cousins who lived in Inwood, which I thought was the great big city. Oh, I thought that was the big city to me. Those buildings were so tall. and they would come up on Sunday night, and my father used to play the guitar, and we would sing and dance and have all kinds of fun, and that stopped because so many of them were in the service. And my cousin, well, I guess we called him uncle because he was older. He couldn't use his car because he couldn't get the gas. So those kind of things changed a bit. Yeah, things did change a bit. But Hastings was very much very patriotic, I would say. Indeed, they were extremely patriotic. They got into everything.
Do you remember bond drives?
I was just going to say that, bond drives and
scrap collections.
Scraps always. I don't know. Maybe somebody did a narrator can tell you this. I recall distinctly taking the labels off tin cans and stomping on them. And I forget what else. Well, the tin cans especially. Tin foil, which came from chocolate bars, cigarette packs. Oh, cigarettes were horrible. You couldn't get them. My father bought this thing that made them. They were terrible. He made his own. He rolled his own cigarettes, and he'd say, "This is fine," and all of the tobacco would fall out. They were horrible. But because you couldn't get cigarettes, people would line up for cigarettes, unknown name brands. My mother would go crazy waiting online at the stationery store to get cigarettes from my brother, and he would finally get through to her when a letter would come. "Don't do that, Mom. We get plenty." You know, she didn't know that. She didn't know he didn't get, that's where they were going.
Do you remember saving fat?
that's what I wanted to ask someone about. What did we saved it religiously? What was it used for?
I've often wondered, because I did too, from bacon.
Bacon when we had it, or if my mother had a piece of pork, she would strain it. I recall her doing this into a Crisco can.
We had a coffee can, a 2-pound coffee can.
Okay, well, same principle. Somebody told me they used it to pack parts. I can't imagine putting them in grease, but I would love to find out what.
Something for the war effort, I know, but I don't know what they used that for.
Well, we did save it, and I remember her with the cheesecloth, straining the fat from a piece of a loin of pork or something into a Crisco can. I recall that very well. I didn't do that part, but we did the tin and tin foil. I think she saved string. I don't know what for, but she did. Well, you're always afraid something was going to be rationed, and you'd be without.
Yeah.
That also could be from coming from a family that didn't have many means from years ago, so you had to be frugal.
Yeah.
But other than stuff like that.
When the fellows came back from the service, was there, I suppose they came individually rather than as a group?
They did. Yeah, they drifted back. You'd hear, did you hear that Jimmy Slavin is home from the war, or so my brother-in-law, or he wasn't my brother-in-law then, but you'd hear say, oh, good, he's back, that's terrific. Or when someone was wounded or missing in action, everybody prayed. I mean, everybody was interested. Did you hear any more? Did you hear any more about him? Have they found him and that kind of stuff?
Were there many missing in action?
I don't recall. I couldn't tell you the numbers, but I do know that there were people missing in action, yes. And I don't remember how many we had died. Quite a few for the size of this village. There were quite a few people who were killed in action. I think I'm speaking mostly of the village area. I don't know, I'm not saying the entire village, the whole town of Hastings, but all of us, and there were many of us who worried together. The kids, the teenagers, the parents, everyone worried together about when somebody was
sort of support group, you'd call it
I
today.
think that's what it was in a way. You'd call up so-and-so and say, did you hear, did his mother hear any more? Have they gotten any news about him? Where is he? Do you have any idea where he is? There, I guess we were informed a lot by the Hastings News. I remember Lynn's column, come to think of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do remember it. It was something the way these villages pulled together.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody pulled together.
Yeah.
For the war. Yeah, they did. They really did. It was something. It wasn't until I got involved with Bob in the Navy reunion, the Sampson reunion, to which he belongs, and went to the first reunion with him up at Seneca Falls, and saw all the pictures, the group pictures. Now, we're talking after the fact that we're married and have had kids and so forth. I would look at these pictures of all these sailors and I would say, oh, they were babies. I look at those faces, my God, that could be my kid. They were babies, so I can imagine how my mother and other mothers must have felt with their sons, especially naive, small-town people kind of thing. I don't mean dumb, but I mean going off to all parts of the world, never knowing if they're coming back. I'll tell you something that I probably shouldn't put on tape, but my mother, packages, we sent packages all the time, all kinds of packages to the servicemen. Homemade cookies, cakes, whatever we could. Even if they got there stale, my brother would say they still tasted delicious, and everybody shared. But she would hollow out a loaf of Italian bread. I think it was Italian. I would watch her do this. She would hollow out a loaf of Italian bread and put in a pint of rye whiskey or something. You weren't supposed to do this. You weren't allowed to do this. And somebody told her you could. Because he was someplace in Italy, and she'd say, those guys, they could have maybe a little whiskey would keep them warm. Or I remember her doing it, and then wrapping it all up and putting it around with the cookies and sending them. And then wait to hear if he got the package.
And did he offer?
Yes, he did. And the bottle didn't break. Isn't that something?
Yeah. Yeah, that is.
I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but apparently, maybe he told her that guys did it.
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't. Maybe some mother told her. Well, she belonged to the Mothers Club, and they had all kinds of things. She did a lot of stuff with the war effort also. She watched for, answered telephones, volunteered down at the police station and answered telephones and stuff when there was a air raid drill.
Well, I think you've given me a very good idea of village life during the war.
I think maybe I've rambled too much.
No, this is fine. I think we're just about through. Anything else you want to?
Mm-mm. There's nothing I can remember that's, I can't recall anything that's earth-shaking except what I've told you, which is kind of mundane stuff. It isn't really very...
No, it gives a good idea, a good feeling for what life was like.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of different from my community where I grew up, but many similarities too.
Well, I guess small towns were that way. They all kind of pulled together, right?
Allison, and I'm interviewing Anne Schnibbe on Friday, February 10th, 1995, and we're going to talk about her experiences at home in Hastings during World War II. Let's see, how old do you think you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, let's see. I was 28 in 1941 would make me almost 13.
Oh, 13. So you were in the 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade?
Yeah, either 7th going into the 8th, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was at junior high.
That's right. They called it junior high then?
They called it junior high.
Yes, they did it in my place too. Were you shocked? Did you know that a war was going on in Europe?
I knew that a war was going on in Europe because we would hear our parents and their friends speak of it. Speak of the problem in Poland and all that. But I'll be honest with you, I did not know where Pearl Harbor was.
I don't think many of us did.
When I heard the news and they said the Navy base, or however they put it on the radio, was attacked in Pearl Harbor, I was, a shock the same as the rest of the family, but it never occurred to me that it was the United States.
Oh, you didn't realize?
I didn't even give that a thought.
Oh.
And I didn't, then they said, my father said, well, that's a possession of the United States, so that they attacked our country. I had no idea where Pearl Harbor was. I'm not ashamed to say it, but I just wasn't up on my geography.
I don't think I knew where it was either,
No?
except they said Hawaii, and I knew that we had a big naval base in Hawaii. But I didn't know it was called Pearl Harbor.
At the time that this happened, I didn't find out until maybe toward the end of the war, when one cousin came to visit. I knew he was in the Army. I had no idea, regular Army, so he was in before this happened. I had no idea, none of us did in the family, that he had been at Pearl Harbor when this attack occurred. So we learned all of that
Did
later.
he tell you about it?
He told us about how horrendous it was and how shocked they were, all the guys with him. He was a kid, he was 18 or 19 or something. He had joined the regular Army probably 1940 or something, and was stationed there. But we didn't know this. None of us knew this until we saw him probably during the war when he had a furlough from somewhere and came to visit. We had no idea that he had been there, right there. So that was kind of exciting to hear him talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Must have been a terrible experience.
Awful. Yeah.
Terrible experience.
Awful.
Did you ever know Ruth Ball?
Ruth Ball.
She lived in Hastings' house.
Not the teacher.
No.
No, I don't.
Well, she was visiting her sister, who was married to I think he was a naval officer.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, she was visiting her at the time of the attack. And I remember her telling me about it one afternoon, of how horrified everybody was and so taken by surprise.
Sure. That's how my cousin Lou was, too.
Yeah.
Scared to death. He was.
Did you follow the war, the progress of the war?
Well, we did because, you see, as everyone else in town, of course, immediately, practically, it seemed to me almost immediately, the guys were going to join up. They knew they would be drafted, so a lot of them that wanted to go into the Navy would go down to Yonkers and join up. Some of them wanted to be Marines, so they went down and joined up because they knew they'd be drafted into the Army. I recall all this, but it didn't affect my family immediately. I never thought about it immediately. My brother Steve, who was old enough to go into the service, I didn't even think twice about it. He was working at Anaconda. He had been out of school several years already and was working at Anaconda. It just never occurred to me that he would go into the Army. Or maybe it did, but I didn't worry about it immediately. And my younger brother, of course, I knew would never go in because he's younger than I am.
Uh-huh. Well,
I didn't know how long the war would last. I didn't mean it that way, but I mean immediately he wouldn't be taken into the service.
Well, when your older brother, was he drafted?
He was, no, he enlisted. Mm-hmm. And he had, my mother, of course, was very upset, extremely upset, having recalled World War II. World War I, when my father might have been drafted, had she not had one baby and pregnant with another, and I don't know if this is true, I believe it was so, she said that he would have been drafted because they were getting to the point where they were taking fathers, and she and all the neighborhood women and so on went to the draft board and told them they can't take our husbands and so on. But they were going to, when the armistice was signed. And I remember my father saying something to the effect that, well, that wasn't fair. I should have been able to go into the Army and fight for my country. That kind of thing. But she was very, very concerned because of my brother Steve, who was old enough to be drafted. And also I had two brother-in-laws, two sisters who were married. So she was thinking along those lines, but I really wasn't at the time that it was announced that we were.
Did you follow it all in school? Can you remember?
Yes, we did. Oh, sure. We did. And we did at home. We got every paper that there was. We followed, especially after neighbors' sons went in. And, Hastings is a small village, and everybody was like a brother.
Yeah.
Anyone that you grew up with, you knew all the family. And my friend's brother was like my brother, so I was as concerned about him as anyone else. That's how it was in this small town. And so we followed all the battles. We followed everything that we could in every paper. There were many papers at the time. There was the local Gannett, wasn't Gannett then. It was the Herald Statesman, though. And there was, how many New York papers? The Times, the Tribune, the Journal American, which used to be very filled with pictures of battles.
Yeah, I remember
the
that.
The Daily News.
Tabloid.
And, that's right, and the Daily Mirror, and every paper that there was.
And the Hastings News.
The Hastings News, I don't remember that. I'm sure there was the Hastings News during World War I.
Yes, Lynn wrote for it.
That's right, but I don't remember myself reading about the war. I did read about all the local guys. That's right.
She told me that there was a big section of letters from the servicemen, and part of her job was answering the letters.
That's right. She did have a column.
And they published it in the paper. It was a weekly, and so that everybody knew who was where and what was going on.
That's true. They did that, and we also. The families would get together and the kids my age would be together and say, well, now where's your brother, and where is he now? And we all, well, I'll tell you one thing that really I thought was exciting. There was a family whose oldest daughter, both girls were older than I, but the oldest daughter had a very good job in the city in some kind of secretarial position with some company. And she went to Washington, D.C., and I really and truly couldn't tell you what position she had there, but they were looking for good, knowledgeable secretaries to work in Defense Department or something like that. And I'll tell you what was astounding to us, that her mother would allow her to leave Hastings and go all the way to Washington, D.C. And she was probably 22 years old. I mean, you didn't do this kind of thing. You never left home until you got married. You just didn't do it. And that's how it was.
Was it?
Yeah, it was really exciting to think
Yeah.
that Evelyn did this, yeah.
What was her name?
Her name was I don't remember her. Her name was Evelyn Filipovich, and I cannot remember. She married eventually and had raised a family.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think she ever moved back to Hastings. I guess she settled in the Washington, D.C. area. But she was a very, I remember the mothers talking about, I would never let my daughter go to Washington. There are plenty of jobs around here, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny, isn't it?
Yes,
when the
it
guys
is.
are going off to the service. Maybe that was the reason. I tell you this thing, though, about my brother. When my brother went into the service, I asked him to send me names of any guys that he knew that he was in boot camp, and I can't remember where. It wasn't Fayetteville. Would that be Army base? It was someplace in the South. And get me, because I wrote to him regularly.
Uh-huh.
We all did. Get me names of anyone who doesn't have people, guys who don't maybe have families. And I can tell you, Mary, we got letters galore.
Really?
Galore. And my mother would say, what are you going to write to these people? You don't know them. I would write them about what's going on in school, what programs we were in, what we were doing for the Red Cross, what I was involved in. They would send pages of letters.
Oh,
And we came,
wonderful.
yes, and you know what happened? I threw them all away.
Oh, I was just going to ask you.
Isn't that a shame? And I had them up until I was married, probably 5 years at least. And I save everything. There's nothing in this house I haven't saved for 40 years. I threw them out. It's a shame too, because they were interesting.
Did you ever meet any of them?
No, I never met any of them.
Did they send you photographs?
They sent photographs. Some of them sent photographs, but they were newsy type letters.
Yeah.
And at that time, we came home for lunch.
Huh.
I didn't stay it was rare if I stayed for lunch. We came home for lunch, and I would come home for lunch, and I don't know when it happened that they stopped this, but it's not that long ago. There used to be 2 mail deliveries, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So the morning mail delivery would bring scads of letters, and we would sit at the lunch table and open them and read them, and it was great. It was really, I spent a lot of time writing letters.
I bet.
But I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
How many guys did you correspond with?
I would say there had to be at least 10.
My goodness.
10 or maybe 12 in the beginning, or maybe 14. And then they would dwindle, you see, because they go overseas and they wouldn't write back. Or I would write, and some of the fellas that would write regularly didn't write, or I didn't get a letter, and we'd all be wondering, oh my goodness, I wonder if he was in this battle. I wonder what happened to him. See, I would never have a way of knowing if anything happened to them. I'm not family, and my brother, of course, they all went separate ways.
Yeah.
But that's what we did. That's what I did anyway. I wrote to all these fellas.
Did some of your classmates do that too?
I don't recall that they did. They thought it was great that I did it, but I don't recall that they did it, no. And now when I thought about it later, I thought, how did I find the time? Well, I did it at night. I mean, there wasn't a heck of a lot we could do at night. There wasn't any television at all. I was a big radio fan. I still am. Don't care 2 hoots about television, but I would miss radio. radio was the thing, you know. So I guess I did it at night after I finished my homework and stuff.
Well, that's great. I don't know any of my friends who did that.
Oh, I thought it was terrific. They were so nice. They would tell me about who they met, and they would, of course they couldn't, you know, you'd get the letters from overseas. When they went overseas, you'd get the letters that were cut out, or if they'd say something that the censor would cut out. And I recall having to, which I'm sure everyone that's during World War II with family in the service knew, they had to use that, what was that paper, the VJ, what was that mail?
Airmail, V-mail.
V-mail was thin paper,
yes.
Hard to write on. I just thought it was something I wanted to do, and that they would enjoy, you know.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Even though it was maybe kid stuff to them, but they were kids themselves when you think about it. They were only 18 and 19 years old, and I thought it was nice of my brother to. They said, "Oh yeah, tell your sister to write to me and give her my name," and I did. Mm-hmm. One man I am almost sure, who was from the Boston area, from here. One man I think might have been killed in the war, because I never heard. We were regularly corresponding about where he was now, and when he wanted to get into the paratroopers and he missed it by a couple of inches, he was a little too short or something like that. I can't recall exactly, but there was some reason why, so they put him somewhere else. And then weeks would go by and I wouldn't hear, and I'd get a letter, and then more weeks, and then I never heard. So I don't know whether he just stopped. We talked about this in the family, that he wouldn't have just stopped writing without an explanation. Well, I don't want to write anymore, the war's coming to a close or whatever. Nothing like that. This was probably before I graduated, so it was 45. War wasn't all over yet.
Where was he at the time?
He was, I think he was in France. I think he was in France. See, I did have a picture of him. And I'm sorry I threw them out.
Oh, it's a shame.
When I think about it now, I really should have kept them.
Yeah.
Actually, to tell you the truth, it was Bob who said to me, "What do you want with all those old letters?" So,
would have been nice to have had them now.
Well, it would have been wonderful just to read them and bring back some memories, because...
well, he may have been killed in the Battle of the Bulge or one of those.
Could have been. No, I don't know. And there wasn't anyone truly, Mary, in this village that I went to school with who didn't have someone in the service.
Really?
If it wasn't a brother, it was an uncle. You know, one of my best friends had all sisters until after the war, when her mother had a baby boy. But the others, everyone had a brother-in-law. I had a brother-in-law who worked in the Little Red Factory, which we call the Little Red, which is up near you.
Oh.
That was Ferricart.
Yeah.
Well, I worked there too.
What did they do?
They made airplane parts. And, you know, what we call them little cores. They were we packed them. Marie mentioned this also. We worked in a small room off the large room, and we packed these little things. We inspected them and packed them in little boxes. I would say the boxes were, maybe 3.5 or 4 inches by 6 inches, maybe a little larger than that. And we packed them, and they reminded me later on, when I had a sewing machine, they reminded me of the bobbins. That was about the size of a round bobbin.
Do you know what they were for?
They said they were for some part of the fuselage. I don't know. You see, I never questioned that. I mean, we got paid to work, and I can tell you that the owner of the company was called Ferricart.
How do you spell it?
Ferrocart. Ferricart Aviation, I think they called it. And we worked up there, and we always called that place a Little Red Factory, because it was a Little Red Factory.
Yeah. Was it just a one story at that time?
No. It was 2-story. I don't really know what they had downstairs. We worked upstairs.
Oh.
And the main part of the room was quite large, with the machines that had lathes. They had lathes. I learned to use, that's when I learned to use, golly, I can't think of the name of the thing it's called. Anyway, it was a thing that measured these cores. They had to be a certain...
Calipers?
No, it was some kind of meter. Well, I can't remember. Isn't that funny? We were taught to use them because these cores had to be a certain diameter and a certain width so that you measured them. And if they were just the least bit off, you put them aside. You only put in the box the ones that were correct. Mm-hmm. And these are the things that were made outside by girls, mostly girls.
I was just going to ask you, did they hire a lot of high school girls?
They hired high school girls. We were allowed to work from 4 to 8.
From 4 to 8?
That would be after school, and we couldn't work any later than 8 o'clock. We were only allowed to work 4 hours a day.
5 days a week?
5 days a week. I don't think we...
That would have been a 20-hour week.
It was a 20-hour week. Mm-hmm. Now that I think about it, I worked and I wrote letters and...
Yes, you did a lot.
Never gave it a thought.
Yeah. Well, did you work on Saturday too?
I don't think we worked on Saturday, but I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
I think some people did work. My sister Seal worked there, but she worked full-time because she was out of high school.
Uh-huh.
She had already graduated, and she worked there, and she worked on the machines. It was mostly girls that worked on the machines. There were a couple of men. There was one man who was my brother-in-law. And my brother-in-law, Ed Smith, had he could see well, but he wore very, very thick glasses, so I have no idea what his eyesight was, but I do know that he was exempt from the Navy, from the service because of his eyesight and because he worked in a war factory. Mm-hmm. And he was married to my sister Kay. There were no children yet. This was 1942, I think, or so. And I remember them discussing it in the family. They had their own place, their own apartment. But I remember the family, we were all in on this conversation about that Ed wants to go in the service, he wants to go in. He's a radio man. He was a radio man always. And he wanted to go into the service, and he could get into the Navy, even though his eyesight, was such that he may not have been accepted into the Army, but it wasn't so bad that he couldn't go in as a radio man. And he did enlist in the Navy, because he said it was to the effect, which a lot of guys did, I guess, I don't feel like I'm doing my part, I really should be serving my country, and so he joined the Navy.
Yeah. You want to
pause? I put it on pause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did most of the girls in your class do war work of one sort or another?
Quite a few of us did. I don't recall how many of us. Perhaps with me at Farragut, probably 8 to 10.
Huh.
I would say. I can't really recall. There were a bunch of us,
mm-hmm.
Working.
Well, how about the boys? Did they work too after school?
There were
down at Anaconda, for instance?
I don't know. I really don't. I don't recall what the boy. I truly do not remember. I do not have any recollection of any of the boys working with us. No, there were a couple. There were a couple who worked with us up there. And when you asked me before, I think they did work Saturdays. I think they did work Saturdays. But what I wanted to tell you about my brother-in-law, Ed Smith, was that my sister and he must have discussed it at length, and she agreed, okay, if that's the way you feel. It was an unfortunate decision because he was killed in the war.
Oh.
He went into the Navy, and as often happened, you make a choice of what you would like, and then you don't always get that choice. I remember that from Bob telling me at Sampson, how they would say, well, we'd like to be such and such, and then you'd end up being a butcher or something. You know what I mean? They did what they did. And he went on a minesweeper, and they were on some kind of mission coming from England, and they hit a mine. And, so that was it. But he worked up at that factory. So, The boys, young boys from my age group, there were some that did work up there, if I recall. But I think, as I said, I think they worked Saturdays as well. But I don't remember ever working Saturdays. We worked a 20-hour weekend.
Well, there are probably laws that you, at least in Massachusetts, where I grew up, until you were 16, you could only work so many hours a week.
That's right. But I want to tell you something very interesting about Ferricart. Now, I did not know Bob Schnibbe, until after the war. Although he was familiar with Hastings, having come here since a kid, because his Uncle Jack Riley had the station, which is now Bob's. At some point, I don't remember what year it was, I worked at Ferricart for quite a while. I mean, 3 or 4 years. I guess 2 years, I would say. Jack Riley leased out part of his building, the present site of the service station now, which is the large building, was just open space. It had been a car dealership many years before, probably his, and forget about it during the war. And he had a small brick building on the corner of the property from which he worked, and the pumps out front. Well, he leased out that part of the building, which is now the present Bob service station, and I recall he leased it out to Ferricart, this aviation place. And so I worked there.
Oh, so you worked in two sites, the Little Red
Right. You could choose. I guess you could choose. They said who would asked who would like. I said I would like to. It's closer to the village and so forth. And I remember distinctly that Hastings Electric, Luis Aloysio's crew, whoever he had, came in and put in all the fixtures and fixed the whole place up as a, what do they call it? An annex to Ferricart. Not the making of the parts, as the factory did, but the jobs that we did.
Packing them.
Exactly. And there were a couple of men I can recall as foremen or something, but mostly it was very light work, and that's where they put the teenagers that came to work. But what I think is funny about it is after the war I meet somebody who owns the business and I marry him.
Yes, that is.
Is that funny?
Yeah. Where did Bob come from, Yonkers?
Bob is originally from Woodhaven, Queens.
Oh.
And his aunt, who's still alive, by the way, 97, was the wife of Jack Riley, who had the service station. Well, I imagine, I don't know, but I probably shouldn't even say this, but I imagine it was a good source of income for him, simply because there was nothing. There were no tires, there were no parts, there were no cars, there was no gasoline.
There isn't much gasoline either.
Because I can't imagine a man like that doing this, but it also was a help for the war effort to have a place to do this. That same building, after the war was over, became a sort of mini, what do they call the things for the servicemen? Oh goodness, I met mine.
You mean a,
what do you call it?
Canteen?
A canteen.
Oh,
for returning servicemen. So then I went there, and I was with the guys that came home from the service. We played cards. Of course, by now I'm a senior in high school.
Yeah.
So, isn't that something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hastings was really quite remarkable with the work they did for the war, I think, in many ways.
Did you have any feelings about the Japanese, the Germans, the Italians?
Well, we were not crazy about them. Let's put it that way. I was never, I never...
Were there any Italians or Germans in
town? There were
town?
German Americans in town, and German American families that...
Did they suffer discrimination, I wonder?
I don't know. I think there was one family that people were inclined, I guess. Mary, maybe because I was a teenager. And war or no, teenagers usually, they're just not like that. I mean, they just don't, they get along with everyone usually, I think. this is what it amounts
Uh-huh.
to. It never occurred to me that someone whose name might be Vaughn or something, it just never occurred to me. Because again, it's small town, and I've known these people all my life. I couldn't imagine,
Would you have heard adults discussing it in any way?
did
Or maybe
hear-
there wasn't any feeling.
No, there were some. Oh yes, there were some. I did hear adults discussing some German Americans that they were a little bit, I wonder where they go on Tuesday nights when they go to the city. Are they attending Bund meetings and stuff like that? I do recall that. Yes, I do. But I don't remember who.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recall who. And I don't think it was said with any venom or anything, but it was just, hey, listen, they could be very loyal to the fatherland, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I did hear that. I'm not going to deny that. I heard
Yeah.
stuff. But I don't think that I thought much of it because there was nothing there was nothing nasty that went on about it. But
Were there any COs that you knew about?
I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean.
Conscientious objectors.
Oh, I don't know. I don't recall. Everybody I knew went in the service or was deferred because they were doing war work or something, but a conscientious objector, I don't recall. Only from the screen, you heard about actors, this actor or that actor who was not in the service, and you'd hear the grumbling amongst the fathers. Well, why isn't he in? He's perfectly healthy, kind of thing. What's a CO,
Yeah.
What's a conscientious objector? But other than that, no, I don't.
How did your family react to the rationing?
Oh, that was beautiful. I'll tell you what happened. They got to the point, as everyone is aware, probably beginning of 44 or so, they started taking fathers. There was only single guys and guys that joined up and young marrieds and so forth, but they didn't touch, at first, men who had a child, or then they got to 2 children. But my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, my other sister's husband, she had 1 little boy, and he was, well, let's see, he might have been 2, and they drafted his father. So she put her furniture in storage, and she came to live with us.
Oh.
Which was a way of handling it, of coping. She came to live with us. Now, my brother was in the service, and my other sister was married, so there was room. We made room, that's all. And my sister came to live with us and took a job at night, only at night. I can't remember what was up in Dobbs Ferry. She didn't work in Tarrytown at that big Eastern Aircraft or anything like that. She worked somewhere that did war work. My memory is terrible. I can't remember that name of the place she worked in at Dobbs Ferry. She took a night job so that she could be with the child all during the day, and then, of course,